Hi everybody, this is Jeremy Siskind. I'm the author of Jazz Piano Fundamentals and playing solo jazz piano. And today is part 2 in a little series that I'm doing, which is about adding chords in that aren't written. If you haven't listened to part 1 is, in my opinion, more important. It deals with sidestepping and tonicization, which are things that I use basically every time I sit down to play the piano. What I'm telling you about today are some kind of more specific or slightly more niche, although still pretty common, ways that we ornament or add to existing chord progressions. So we're going to jump in. It's going to be a little bit, scattered, a little bit just grab bag here and there. But these are all really important tools, tricks of the trade that are great to add to your repertoire. So let's check it out. Let's see if I can do this. Okay, adding chords that aren't written, part 2. Just as a reminder from part 1, we're not talking about like doing a massive reharmonization and showing up with a brand new chart. We're talking about things that you can do in a jam session setting or at a casual standards gig that aren't going to freak anybody out too much, but will add color. And these are things that good jazz pianists are doing automatically all the time. Okay, good jazz pianists and me. So the James Bond motion, this is most specifically for when you have a minor chord. So let's choose D minor, and especially if you're holding it for a couple of bars. So you're getting to the end of a ballad and you're just holding this chord for a while at the end of a phrase. Maybe that's the scenario. And the James Bond refers to that we're going to move the 5th from 5 to sharp 5 to 6, and then back to sharp 5, or we might think of it as flat 6, right? So if I'm getting to the end of the second A of My Funny Valentine, this is a terrible example. Why did I choose this example? Because it goes to major. But let's say I'm on Autumn Leaves. Hear it in there? Okay. And this is a nice thing. If you're playing solo piano, you can double it in both your hands. Do you see it going on in both left and right? If you're just playing with a band, then maybe could be something like this. And here I'm intentionally leaving out the 7th because that 6th is going to rub up against the 7th. That's going to be a B natural and then back to B flat. Nice. You can do a similar thing in major keys, right? If we're in D major instead of D minor. In fact, I always think of this as like the classic Broadway progression, because if you've played a lot of Broadway, it's so I guess it could be cheesy, but it isn't necessarily. Not bad, right? So that would be, again, I'm going to leave out the 7th and just give you 3 notes. Maybe somebody smarter than me can figure out how to do this with the major 7th in there as well. I'm sure it's possible. And just as a word to the wise, a lot of times, if we're thinking in context, a lot of times this last chord is going to be kind of leading into the next section. So you don't always have to play that last chord of the James Bond progression. If I'm playing Autumn Leaves, for example, it might be right. I might choose to go to a different chord there. So So you don't always have to play that last chord, but sometimes you're just chilling out on minor, and that's a nice thing to do. This next one is also for moments when you're chilling out on minor. I call this the Bebop Motion because of the Dizzy Gillespie tune called Bebop, which goes something like... And so it's based around this motion. This we hear in many of our tunes, including, this is why My Funny Valentine was on my mind, because we hear... We hear that motion from root. The way that it goes is root to major 7 to minor 7 to 6. So if we're doing this in D minor, now here we really need to avoid the 7th because that's the note that we're going to be moving around. If we want to use the 9th in here and create a 4-note voicing, that's going to sound okay. F, A, C, and E, and then F, A, B, and E. Cool, I just had a moment of anxiety that what I was doing was not on the screen and you guys were just watching me writing. So same thing if I'm on Autumn Leaves. Now, it really doesn't work as well on a major chord for a couple reasons. First of all, just the major triad without the 7th sounds weird. Yeah, it's just, for whatever reason, it just, I think actually the reason is that as we get with the major 3rd, as we get to the dominant 7th, it just sounds like a dominant chord, and it sounds like a dominant chord that didn't ever really resolve. So this one I'd probably only recommend using for minor. The walk-up is a really important progression that we use mostly in major settings. And in fact, I'll also show you a progression that I call the diatonic walk-up. So the walk-up, well, there's a few different walk-ups. Let's take, in the context of a 2 to a 5, so if we're going from D minor 7 to G7, we could go D minor, D minor, I'd probably do E diminished 7th, although there's a couple different ways to do that. D minor over F, and then F sharp diminished. I'll move this bar line over so you can actually read what I'm writing. F sharp diminished 7th, and then landing on G. Creates such nice motion instead of just... So I gotta move this G7 over here. I said this in the previous video, but this is something you could do either with the left hand, with the right hand, or with both hands. Do you hear me arpeggiating the notes of the walk-up? And I could do that even if I'm not doing it with my left hand. It creates that motion. Now, if we're hanging out on just a C major 7 for a while, we can also do a walk-up with that. And so this would be like, let's say C6, D minor 7, D sharp diminished, and then C over E. And depending on what we're doing, we might do this differently from a rhythmic perspective. So we might do 2 beats on C6 and then aim for this C over E. Or, if we're doing something in the circle of fifths or aiming for some kind of an F chord, then we could do it all within one measure. Very classic progression, has that elegant jazz sound. Now, the diatonic walk-up, this is something I associate strongly with Keith Jarrett. And, of course, diatonic means we're going to use notes from the scale. So instead of a 2-5, we'll start with a 2 chord. Then we'll walk up using the notes of the scale so that we push that 5 chord back by a couple beats. You'll hear Keith doing this really, I don't know about frequently, but it's definitely a part of his repertoire to do this. And if you want that real Keith sound, I end up playing this as a sus rather than as a dominant chord. Another thing that I personally learned from Keith, although he's certainly not the one to invent this in any way, shape, or form, is a common tone diminished. The meaning of common tone diminished is that we're going to take the diminished chord based on the same root note as the chord that we're modifying. So for a C major 7, we're going to use a C diminished 7. And this is a great way to delay a resolution. So if we have a 2-5-1 like this, instead of going right to the C major, I'm going to add in a whole measure of C diminished 7th and then resolve to C major 7. And I love doing this especially right at the top of the form of a tune because it prevents it from sounding like kind of a rival and obfuscates, to use a fancy word, that arrival at the beginning of a tune. It can be really colorful if used appropriately. Planing is kind of a big concept to talk about, but I'm going to give you just a basic example. The definition of planing is that you're taking a chord that you're aiming for and you're moving it, you're transposing it exactly along with the melody. So let's say we're aiming for the C major. And the chord here was G sus. Okay. Beautiful melody, the best thing I've ever written. So if we're doing planing, and this is typical kind of in later styles, more in the 60s and 70s, what we're going to do is we're going to move that C major along with the melody. So here it's a whole step. So we're going to play that C major a whole step down. And then here it's one more whole step. So we're going to play a major 7th, another whole step down. This is, you guys who watched that first video, you might think this looks very much like sidestepping. And in a sense it does because we're moving a chord. But sidestepping, remember, is always by half step. Here, if we're planing, it's just going to be with the melody. So instead of this G sus, there's a bad joke being G sus is risen. I'm going to go, right? And that's against the G bass. Pretty nice. And so this would change, if we're going, let's now do triplets, but in thirds. So here's our G sus again. These are triplets. That's how that's working rhythmically. So now, because the melody is different, we're going to plane differently. So let's see. C, this is a major third. So down a major third is going to be that A flat. This is a minor third from that. So that's going to be F. Am I doing this right? I think I'm doing it right. And then this is down a major third from the A. So that's going to be D flat, right? That makes sense. It's the third of each chord. So, whoa. Not bad. Kind of cool. something you could use in an arrangement. I'm often coaching the tune Misty. That's one that everybody loves to play. And it can be cool to go, to do some planing. So that's the third of a minor chord. And I'm just selecting all minor chords and making sure the third's in the melody. So planing is transposing in a parallel way. The tritone 2-5 is a very specific progression that replaces a 2-5-1. So if we have D minor 7 to G7 to C7, when we do a tritone 2-5, we're going to play the D minor 7. Here, I'll do this in another color so you can see it nice and clearly. I'll do the D minor to the G7 in just one bar. And then I'm going to do E flat minor. Sorry, I have the wrong title here because I'm an idiot. This is the sidestep 2-5. If you're still watching this video, God bless you. My apologies. The sidestep 2-5. So sidestep meaning that we're transposing the whole 2-5 by a half step. And here, unlike when we're sidestepping with our voicings, we're always going to want to start above. So instead of, this is now, and it's not a coincidence that I played an F in the melody. This is most commonly used when the third of the 2 chord is in the melody, because as you can see, it becomes the 9th of the new chord. The third of the 2 chord becomes the 9th of the 2 chord. That sounds like a lyric. All right. So that's the sidestep 2-5. Here's just a place that I can randomly think of that a lot of people use this is in There Will Never Be Another You. Here it's going to be the third in the melody, so usually it would just be a 2-5, but you could, instead of doing just F minor to B flat 7, you could do F sharp minor, B7, F minor, B flat 7. Now, this is one that if a bass player hears you doing it, they're going to try to catch, because this is part of the jazz lingo, and it's pretty far, outside of the given chord progression, right? So oftentimes I've heard, when I was a student, people were like, if you're going to do this, give me a look first so I'm listening. So it's definitely doable, but this is one that is going far enough away from the changes that other people will probably try to do it with you if you go there. One that people don't necessarily need to go with you on is if you're in the diatonic circle of fifths. So just to give you an example, let's say that you're coming up with, you're given a chart that just has this progression. And it's just vamping. Very commonly, we'll add chords in the diatonic circle of fifths. By that, I mean chords from the key of C major moving in fifths. Okay, so it's like tonicization, where you're going to go 5 to 1 to 5 to 1 to 5 to 1. But here, we're not doing dominant chords only. We're doing any chords from C major. And the most common thing that we're going to do is we'll add a 2 chord to the 5 chord. So instead of just, we'll go, even if it doesn't say it on the chart, if we're playing in kind of a jazz style, then that's going to be it's going to be a very common thing to do. And then, if we're really getting bored, we can go one more step in the diatonic circle of fifths. Again, here it's not all dominant chords. We're not going to go to A7. In the key of C major, the kind of A chord we have is an A minor chord, right? So and just hypothetically, in front of that would be an E minor. So it's mostly not going to bother anybody, especially if I'm accompanying or I'm playing solo piano. when I come across one of those simple chord progressions, if I feel like creating more motion, this would be one way to do it. And just orally contrast that if I'm going to do that same thing with tonicization. That's going to go further away from the key, whereas using this diatonic triglyphs, by definition, of course, is going to stay. And just be a little bit easier on the ears, a little bit less jazzy. Okay, I'm going to leave you guys there. There is going to be a third part of the series, I'm deciding now, where I'm going to take a tune, and I'm going to show you how to add in some of these chords that aren't necessarily there. But before I go, just a friendly reminder, check out my books. That's the best way to support me for now. Playing solo jazz piano fundamentals. I'm really grateful for all your support, and I'll see you all soon.